right, so we're back. And today,
Mm-hmm.
we are taking a deep dive into something I think is really interesting.
Yeah.
It's a connection between loft spaces and entrepreneurs.
Right.
And specifically, we're going to be looking at this in the context of New York,
Okay.
especially Brooklyn.
Interesting.
And we've got some excerpts from a text that's exploring this link, and it goes way deeper than just like exposed brick and like that cool vibe that you get.
Yeah, I mean, it really is fascinating, how these spaces that were designed, for purely industrial purposes
Right.
became these hubs for creativity and innovation.
That's kind of caught my eye too. And I think before we go any further, maybe it's a good idea to like define what we even mean when we're talking about loft spaces.
Yeah.
Because I feel like people have an idea in their head, but
Sure.
it's got to be more nuanced than that, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
Okay.
think about it in the historical context. These were former factories, warehouses, industrial spaces,
Right.
not built for living,
Right.
right? And so that's where you get that raw, unfinished aesthetic.
Yeah.
The exposed brick, the beams.
Oh, yeah.
And that seems to resonate with a certain entrepreneurial spirit,
Yeah, I could see that. It's like the space itself reflects that startup journey,
Mm-hmm.
that constant building and adapting.
Yeah.
So, okay, so we've got that. But then why Brooklyn?
Right.
Like what makes Brooklyn in particular this like hotbed for loft-dwelling entrepreneurs?
Well, I think it's a combination of factors. Brooklyn has gone through this amazing transformation, from its industrial past to, this haven for artists.
Right.
And now it's this entrepreneurial hotspot. And, one factor is affordability. At least it was more
Yeah.
affordable than Manhattan.
Right.
And so this drew in, artists, makers, and importantly, startup founders,
Mm-hmm.
people who might have limited capital but big dreams.
Of course.
And these repurposed spaces, they provided this really affordable communal place to work.
Yeah, so it's not just the looks of the place.
Yep.
The text also kind of implies that the actual layout of these lofts, like, might actually fuel that entrepreneurial spirit.
Right.
How does that work?
Well, think about it in terms of open layouts, encouraging collaboration, almost forcing interaction.
Uh-huh.
Then you've got this abundance of natural light,
Yeah.
which studies have shown can actually boost your mood
Makes sense.
and productivity.
I can definitely see that. I mean,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Mm.
Could you talk a little bit more about that connection between like space and psychology?
Sure.
Like, what are the specific effects that might benefit entrepreneurs in these spaces?
Well, there's a whole field, dedicated to the psychology of space.
Oh, wow.
How our environment actually shapes our thinking and our work.
Mm-hmm.
And open spaces can foster a sense of community,
Right.
which is crucial for startups,
Yeah.
right? Then you've got the natural light, which can combat stress and fatigue
Right.
and keep those creative juices flowing.
Yeah, and I imagine that the less structured environment
Mm-hmm.
kind of mirrors the fluid nature of a startup.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's interesting to think about the positives, but
Yeah.
this text also kind of hints at the less glamorous side.
Right.
What are some of the challenges
Sure.
that come with loft living, especially if you're someone that's running a startup?
Yeah. Well, zoning laws can be a bit tricky.
Oh, right.
Noise levels can be a factor.
Yeah.
Privacy can be a challenge. You're often working alongside others,
Right.
which, can be energizing, but also distracting.
Yeah. It's a trade-off.
It is.
So I guess what we're learning here is like that romantic ideal of the loft
Mm-hmm.
needs to be balanced with some practical considerations.
Absolutely.
So I'm curious, is this loft entrepreneur connection something that's unique to New York? Like, do we see similar trends in other cities around the world?
Absolutely. I mean, think about Berlin,
Okay.
London, even parts of Shanghai.
Wow.
You see this repurposing of industrial spaces into these hubs of creativity and innovation, often driven by the same factors, affordability, community, and a certain aesthetic that appeals to people who are pushing boundaries.
Right.
It's a global shift.
It really sounds like these lofts
Yeah,
aren't just spaces. They're part of a whole ecosystem,
I think so.
especially in a place like Brooklyn.
Yeah. And they nurture that creativity.
Right.
They foster collaboration, and they attract those with that entrepreneurial drive.
Fascinating to think about that.
Yeah.
And I guess maybe that unfinished quality of a loft serves as a constant reminder
Mm-hmm.
that the journey, like the space itself, is never truly finished.
That's a great way to put it.
So for all of our listeners out there, something to think about. If you were launching a startup, Could you see yourself thriving in a loft space? What kind of environment best fuels your creativity?
That's a great question.
Thanks for joining me today.
My pleasure.
It's been a really interesting conversation.
Yeah, it has.
We'll see you all next time
See you then.
for another deep dive.
Bye.